Hey guys, welcome to the Massive Iron channel. I'm Steve Shaw. In this video, I'm going to clear up confusion about bar speed, reps in reserve or RIR, and training to failure. Before I get into this topic, if you guys need coaching, check out the link below. Coaching is what I do for a living. I would love to help. All right, there's a lot of confusion when it comes to this topic. We have reps in reserve. How many reps are left in the tank? Do we need to worry about this sort of thing? Training to failure. Do we need to worry about training to failure? And I'm going to get into how bar speed can be used as a tool to analyze how close you are to failure, how many reps in reserve you have left, etc. Now, before we dive into things, we have to establish the fact that not all lifts are equal. This is an area or an aspect of training where a lot of influencers or fitness personalities get things wrong. They kind of lump sum all exercises into the same pool. And obviously, the demands of every exercise are different. When it comes to training to failure, when it comes to trying to judge how many reps you have left in the tank or RIR, it goes without saying that every exercise is different. There's nuance. You can't simply make up one rule and apply it to all exercises. This just doesn't make sense, and it doesn't really work in the real world called the gym. So we want to group lifts into two general categories. Number one is a posterior chain focus lift, like the squat, the deadlift, the Romanian deadlift, and the good morning. And then basically you have everything else. And we're going to cover these other lifts here just in a minute. I want to state again that every lift should be treated uniquely. This should go without saying. Use common sense when approaching how close to failure you push each lift. Your prime directive should always be remaining healthy. You can't make good progress if you're not in the gym. You can't make good progress if you're injured. There's something I've talked about on the Massive Iron channel over and over again, and probably said this 1,000 times. And I want you guys to remember this before we dive into this information. Stop a set when you feel like you might fail on the next rep or when your form starts to break down. Practice safe sets. When you get to that point in a set where things start to feel off, where your form starts to feel off, or when you feel like you're going to fail on the next rep, that's a good place to stop, because at the end of the day, we are worried about hard training. We're not worried about arbitrary things like RIR or blanketly training to failure. We're worried about hard training and trying to get a little bit more than we did last time into the gym. This is what will drive muscle growth. This is what drives progress, not trying to track RIR, not trying to track how far we are from failure. So be smart, be safe, and just try to advance over where you were the last time you performed an exercise. All right, let's talk about chest pressing first. What is failure? Now, chest pressing exercises in this sense include things like bench press, dumbbell bench press, Smith bench, plate-loaded chest press, and lifts in this family, including declines or close grips or any other variation. Watch your speed closely on your chest pressing. This will tell you a lot. When speed slows noticeably or dramatically when you are pressing a rep up, this typically means the next rep is going to be failure. Now, it's not every case, but it's pretty much 95% of the time. When you are pressing up on a rep and you can notice there's a slowing of speed, even a little bit, that usually means the next rep is going to be failure. This is almost always the case on dumbbell and barbell exercises. On machine exercises, because the leverages can vary a little bit, this might not be the case. You might have a rep or two left. Now, when your speed does slow, this is typically 0 RIR, 0 reps left in reserve. The next rep will be failure. So because the next rep is going to be failure, this is 0 RIR, 0 reps left. When that speed slows, you are done with a chest pressing set. Now, is it safe to train chest presses to failure? It absolutely is. There's a lot of debate and discussion on what you should train to failure, when you should train to failure. But a lot of times these discussions gloss over the reality that the demands of every exercise is different. So On chest exercises, generally, not for everyone and not at all time, you can train chest exercises to failure without them feeling punishing. So adjust this based on how they feel for you, but know that it is safe to push these sets to failure if you have a decent spotter or a decent setup. Now, back pulling is a little bit different. When I say back pulling here, I mean rowing, horizontal rowing, or pulling down from overhead like pull-ups. Back exercises include dumbbell rows, barbell rows, pendlay rows, seated cable rows, machine rows, pull-ups, lat pull-downs, and any lifts that are in this family. Watch your speed closely. When speed slows noticeably or dramatically when you're pulling down on a lat pull down or a seated cable row or a dumbbell row, when that speed slows either noticeably or dramatically, this is form failure. This is a little bit different than chest pressing. When speed slows on chest pressing, the next rep is failure. When speed slows on a row or a lat pull down, that is the failure rep. The rep before this would be considered 0 RIR. You have hit a point where you are no longer able to generate enough power to complete a rep, and that is the failure rep on back exercises. When you are losing power in the middle of a back rep, that set is done. Any reps beyond this you would need to do cheat reps to a degree to finish the rep. Obviously, on things like lat pull downs or dumbbell rows or even pull-ups, we've seen people cheat reps up, and we all kind of know what sloppy form is. But just remember, when that speed slows, that's the failure rep. Now, to make things simple, I count this slowed rep as part of my set. So if I do 6 clean reps of a dumbbell row and the 7th rep, the speed slows a little bit, I still count that 7th rep, that slowed speed rep. I count that as part of the set. You don't have to do this. This is what I choose to do. It just makes things uniform. You can do whatever you want as long as things are uniform. But I like to kind of work to that level so I know exactly where failure is. All right, so delt pressing is pretty much the same as chest pressing. Delt pressing exercises include dumbbell and barbell overhead variations seated or standing, including BTNs and push press, and things like machine overheads and lifts in this family. Like I said, shoulder pressing works the same as chest pressing. When bar speed slows, you will almost always fail on the next rep. So if you're pressing up and all of a sudden speed slows, you'll almost always fail on the next rep. You could get an extra rep or two, but for the most part on dumbbell and barbell variations, this is almost always the case. Now on machine lifts, depending on their setup and the leverages, et cetera, and how ganky or clean these machines are, you might be able to get an extra rep or two. Just remember, when speed slows on an overhead press, this is typically 0 RIR, 0 reps in reserve. The next rep will almost always be failure. Do we have to worry about this kind of minutia stuff like, is the last rep always going to be failure? Sometimes it won't be failure. 95% of the time it will be failure. 95% of the time it will be to failure. We just want a consistent marker, some gauge that we can use consistently. So don't worry if maybe 1 in 20 reps after speed slows isn't a failure. We just want to be consistent in our tracking, if that makes sense. All right, let's get on to the chaos and the sexier things, posterior chain movements. Posterior chain movements are more dangerous, and we don't want to push them to failure. Posterior chain movements include things like squats, deadlifts, good mornings, and Romanian deadlifts, and anything kind of in this family, including like stiff leg deadlifts. Posterior chain exercises can be tricky. You can literally hit a grinder rep and potentially have a rep or two left in the tank. So you can get to the grinding stage and you could still have a rep or two left in the tank. The problem with training close to failure on these types of exercises is that it will typically chew up your lower back and increase overall injury risk. You don't want to do it. You don't want to get into the grinding zone. You don't want to train anywhere near failure. You don't want to be 0 RIR unless it's competition day. Now, I highly suggest stopping these sets at 2 to 3 RIR, and this can certainly be hard to judge, and that's okay. Training is a learning process, so don't pressure yourself to be perfect. We want to kind of learn based on personal experience and what is happening in the gym with these lifts. You want to stop them at a safe point and kind of progress in that safe zone, if that makes sense. Now, when form starts to break down on any of these lifts, shut the set down. If anything feels walky or wanky or off or in any way, shut the damn set down. Now, when you get to this point, it doesn't inherently mean that you're at 1 or 2 or 3 reps left, but we do want to play things safe. Now, what is failure on a posterior chain exercise? Very simple. When you're unable to complete a rep, that is failure on a posterior chain exercise. The rep before failure or 0 RIR is almost always a major grinder. If you hit a major grinder, that is 0 RIR. There's nothing left. There's no more reps left. Grinder reps are characterized by slowing of speed and a general feeling of holy bleep. You kind of feel a little bit of terror mid-rep, unsure if you'll be able to complete it. You know this feeling if you've ever been there on squats where you kind of hit a grinder rep, you're halfway up and you're going, holy bleep. And that feeling when you actually do complete it, you're like, this set is done. Now, the rep before a peer grinder can also slow slightly. It may also have a major grind to it. This is at least 1 RIR, 1 rep in reserve. When you feel a rep like this with at least a little bit of grind to it, or the sense you might grind a little bit on the next rep, it's time to shut down a posterior chain set. We want to work in this zone, this safe zone. We want to track in this safe zone. We want to progress in this safe zone. We're not worried specifically if it's 1 or 2 or 3 RIR. We just have to use common sense. Remember, we're not in the gym to perfectly gauge RIR. We're in the gym to progress sanely and safely, and these are just tools. We don't want to be stapled to the tool so much that we push ourselves occasionally into the grind zone. Now let's move on to leg exercises. Failure on leg exercises can be a little bit tricky. Major leg exercises include leg press, hack squats, pendulum squats, and similar movements. These movements can be harder to gauge as far as training to failure, how far away you are from failure. If you feel speed slow, know that the next rep could potentially be failure. It's not always the case. This is a good place to shut the set down. So if you want consistency, if you want a degree of uniformity, when the speed slows on a rep of leg presses or hack squats or anything feels off form-wise, shut the set down at that position. Live to fight another day. Come back next week, shut the set down at the same position. Get an extra rep in if you can. Always focus on hard training when it comes to leg exercises, first and foremost. Now, if you do feel the speed slow, again, this is a good place to shut the set down unless you are certain, based on experience, that you may be able to knock out another rep or two. This zone can be anywhere from 0 to 2 to 3 RIR. Based on personal experience, your usage of the machine, the hack squat, or the leg press, you might know that, hey, when I kind of hit a slowing speed area, I can generally get in at least another rep. So if that is the case, feel free to push for that extra rep as long as you know, as long as you are confident you can get it. Now, these are generally not movements you want to train to failure simply because of increased injury risk, and it's awkward if you fail. Awkward if you fail on a leg press, your knees are up in your chin. Awkward if you fail on a hack squat, God knows what's going to happen. I don't want to be anywhere near failure on these exercises. I think I might have failed on them once in my career. I've never failed on a hack squat, maybe failed once on a leg press. Play it safe. We want to always be safe and stop a set in the safe zone and try to progress in that lane. All right, to wrap things up, let's look at a few other lifts. Let's start with bicep curls. When you feel a slight slowing of speed, this could be 0 or 1 RIR. There's a chance you'll fail on the next rep when you feel that slowing of speed. Now, a grinder is almost always 0 RIR, meaning you'll fail on the next rep. Now for chest and delt flies, and this can include the pec deck, cable crossover, front laterals, side laterals, rear laterals, whatever you got going on, some sort of a flying movement. When you feel a slowing of speed, we should always consider this to be 0 RIR just for the sake of simplicity. You might be able to grind out an extra rep, but let's be smart and save the stress on your shoulders. Some of these flying movements can place in a little bit of unwanted stress on your shoulders. So for the sake of consistency and uniformity, when you feel speed slow on these reps, you can shut them down. On the rear delt fly, if you want to try for another rep, you're pretty safe. On chest flies or pec deck or cable crossovers, I would just stop things at that point. Now, lunges and Bulgarians, this is an interesting category of lifts. These can be tricky as you really don't want to experience failure on either of these. Make sure you stop a set on these when you get into that holy bleep zone and consider this somewhere around 0 to 2 RIR. Again, we don't need to be ultra specific. Don't worry so much about reps left in the tank or failure on these lifts. Let's be smart and practical here and focus on quality progression when it makes sense. All right, on dips. Dips can usually hit a hard wall quickly. Some individuals have really good lockout strength, and a slowing of speed could still mean a few reps left in the tank. I want you to stop a set of dips when form feels off or when you feel things are slowing. And for pragmatic reasons, just consider this 0 RIR and assume the next rep is failure. Let's just keep things simple. We don't need to overthink everything. Finally, cables and machines. It goes without saying that there are literally endless cable and machine options, and that the feel of each of these can vary wildly. If you've ever been to multiple gyms and tried the cable tricep extension station or the cable station or whatever, the machine chest press, they're just they feel different at nearly every gym. Use your best judgment, and if you notice speed slowing on a rep, it's okay to attempt another rep if you feel the machine or cable is reasonably safe. There's not a lot of downside to attempting another rep on a machine or a cable station, as long as you're not feeling any weird joint, shoulder, or elbow stress. By occasionally pushing a rep deeper on a machine or cable, it will help provide insight into how deep you can train the next time you use this machine. All right, guys, that's it. If you have any questions, drop them down below. You can also head over to Instagram. I would love to help at Ben the Barman. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.